Welcome to this video demonstration of creating a model with a removable die. We do in Crown and Bridge make models with removable dies so that we can individualise the preparation tooth and then fabricate a crown to fit exactly to that. So the process that we're going to go through now is to make sure that we can remove that individual tooth from the arch and then replace it back in the arch in exactly the same position as it is in the impression. This allows us to wax the crown exactly to the margin, and then later on, after the crown is cast, to fit it back and polish it exactly to the margin, so when it's returned to the mouth situation, it's cemented in place with a seamless join between the tooth and the crown. So we're starting with our preparation. We're going to use a scalpel or a sharp instrument to remove the excess from around the impression so that it's level with the edge of the tray. That will allow us to get a nice compact model when we pour the rim in the impression. We're now going to box the impression, and we're going to use Brighton boxing wax, the soft red wax. Just cut one piece down the middle and then heat it like I've just done there, and we're going to wrap it around. And this has the ability to make, if you like, a nice dam all around the impression, so that when we pour our die stone into this impression, we end up with a nice thick rim of material, and it's not going to flow out over the edge, and then we can leave it aside to set in that situation. It's important that we have a nice strong rim, because when we're both extracting it from the impression as well as when we're drilling it for the pins later on, that it is strong enough in through section. So we're just adapting this sheet well around the impression, and now I'm going to take off heat and just make sure the layers are combined together, then take off the excess so that we have a nice even well all the way around. So there's nothing too scientific about this process, and this can be repeated for any impression that you're pouring for any reason, if you want to make sure that you have a good plaster flow wherever you need it, and to limit it flowing in areas where you don't need it. So we're just luting, making sure that this is luted to the tray so that it doesn't move during the pouring process. And then we're ready now to go ahead and pour the models. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut out the interproximal areas of all the teeth except right where our preparation is. So we're just going to go around and cut out that little partition between the teeth, and that will allow the stone to run in between the teeth and to splint the teeth together. It's fairly important if you have recession areas where the impression material has flowed between the teeth that we do that. Otherwise the teeth will break when we're taking the model, taking the set model out of the impression. Then we spray it with some debubblizer. This has the purpose of breaking up the surface anatomy, the surface tension, sorry, of the impression. We make sure that we blow out all of the excess there and make sure it's completely dry once we've put that debubblizer in. Now we're ready to mix up our die stone. The die stone is extra hard, but it's also mixed in a vacuum mixer to make it even harder still, because we have to fit metal components back to this die stone. So there's 20 mils of water and 3 flat scoops of powder, and using Fuji Rock die stone. We're then going to amalgamate it together just so that we know that the mix is correct, the mixing ratio is correct. You'll notice that it's quite stiff in this situation, but by the time it's gone through the vacuum mixer, it will be quite runny and flowable. Then we put the spatulating lid on, seal it down, And then we're going to the vacuum mixer. We switch the vacuum mixer on, plug it in, and we draw a vacuum first. And you'll see up on the dial, the vacuum will pull into the green area. Once it's pulled into there, we place it on the motor and we spatulate it for 10 seconds. If we spatulate it any longer than that, it's going to set too quickly for you. Then we release the vacuum, but we leave the motor running so that the moisture can be purged out of the machine. Then to the vibrator, and we're going to now carefully vibrate this material in at one end and watch the front edge of it flow carefully around in and out of every tooth so that we don't encapsulate any air or bubbles into our pore. So you can control the front edge by simply moving backwards and forwards and controlling the flow of the impression material. You must watch it go in and out of every tooth so that we don't get any bubbles, and particularly in the preparation area. So we can watch it flowing in and out of each tooth and control the speed by just tilting it backwards and forwards. Now once we've achieved that and gone right around the arch without encapsulating any bubbles in there, we're then going to then fill, using the remainder of the material, fill our boxing up until we have an amount that's quite thick and that we're able to trim and pin later on. So you can see we're just going to vibrate the excess into here, and then we're going to put this aside, trying to make sure that our impression is nice and level so that we can later on trim that rim. Once it's set, we're then taking off the boxing wax, and you'll start to get a picture of this rim. So then we're going to remove any flow that's gone up the edge of the tray, should just easily flake off, and then we're just lifting our impression out, carefully lifting it out like so, and you'll see that we have no bubbles at all in our impression. And now the prep there particularly has no bubbles in it, and now we're ready to go to the grinder. So initially we're just going to level the base off so that it's parallel to the occlusal plane. So we're placing the occlusal plane parallel to the wheel and evening that off so it's nice and flat and level. At this stage we're going to leave the outside and we're going to come back and trim that later. But first of all we're going to the router, and you'll notice that the router has a tapering burr in there. So that's going to leave us with a slightly tapering inside to our rim, which means that once we pour this into a base, it's going to lift out of the base quite well. If we had it with a vertical edge, it wouldn't lift out very cleanly, or it's likely, the parallelism is likely to make it hard to remove. Then back to our grinding machine, where we've now set the table down so that it's no longer level, and by just adjusting the plane down, this is the second grinding machine that we can see how we can adjust it down. And now we're going around the outside, and we're going to put the same taper that was on the inside on the outside of the model without touching the teeth, running around. So now we have a taper around the outside, across the back, and we've previously done the taper on the inside. So theoretically, when we pour this into a base, after we've pinned it, this rim will lift out nice and cleanly. Okay, now we can see that we're going to end up putting a cut through either side of the prep there, so that we need to now make sure that the other quadrants are going to be left with pins in them so that they can be extracted. So we're putting 2 pins in the molar behind, 2 pins in the die, and then 3 pins in the large quadrant. We're just going to show you that when we put these pins in, we have to make sure that the drilling machine is centered over the base, not over the top. We can be deceived by the little laser light. So we look at the base and we make sure that we drill the holes so that they're at the correct distance from the edge with the base. And we just lift the drill up with our fingers. It's drilling into the base, and you just lift it up until you have a metal to metal contact. So we've now drilled the 2 holes in the first quadrant, and you can see how they're spaced in the middle of the rim, but spaced apart, so we can put 2 pins in there and relocate that section back together. Now 2 in the die that we're going to be able to remove and work on. These 2 pins go opposite each other, and then in the large quadrant we're going to put 3 pins, 1 at either end and 1 about the centre. So once we've drilled those holes, we're just going to check to make sure that they're all a goodly distance from the sides so that the pins don't break out. Once we've drilled those, we're now going to arrange our pins. To use a little bit of super glue to do this, and we're going to position a long and a short pin in each of the sections, and in the long section we're going to put 2 long pins. So you can see the pins on one end are identical, and on the other end one is short and one is long. Dip the short ones, and we place the short ones in first because it's harder to get to the short ones once they've placed if you have a long one in the road. So we put in the 3 short ones. And these short pins are simply for locating the quadrant once it's been cut out, and the long pins are for securing it to make sure that it's locked into place. Okay, so now we have long pins in all of those areas. We're going to take some sleeves which will fit over this. Now the sleeves we use to embed into the plaster base so that the hole doesn't wear. Now we're going to use a little bit of oil to form a barrier between the rim and the base that we're going to pour, so that the stone of the base doesn't adhere to this rim. And we take it up the side a little bit, up that little bevel that we've put on, the little chamfer that we put on with the router and the grinding machine on the angle. Once we've done that, we place on the sleeves. You will notice with these sleeves there's a little flat side to the flange on the sleeves. That is only significant when you get 2 pins close together. We place the flat sleeves, the flat edge of the sleeve facing each other so that there's a space for the stone of the base to flow around without weakening your base. You can see the flat edges of the sleeves facing each other. So now we're going to mix up some standard modelling stone, and we're going to mix that to a creamy consistency, not too heavy, and we're going to pour that into our base former. It's about the consistency of dolloping cream. And on the inside of the base former you'll see a little fine ridge, and that's the height of the pins that we are putting in. So we fill our model former to that little rim around there. Now we're going to take our rim and we're going to apply stone to the carrying surface of the rim, and we're going to do it in such a way that there are no bubbles encapsulated between the base of our rim and the stone, because this is going to be the seating surface for our model for the rest of these procedures, and we need that to be nice and sound with no bubbles there. Particularly take care around the area where we're going to be sectioning this to make sure that we have a nice seating surface. Remove any excess that's run down the side of that bevel, and now our base has been vibrating away nice and steadily so there's no bubbles in it. And we're just going to vibrate this into place very carefully, centering it perfectly into our crucible, into our base former, so that we know that we have a nice neat model. And there we have the base poured. We're going to set that aside and let it set. So here it is after it's set. You will see the shadow of the long pins in the base, and we're just going to press on those with a sharp instrument, a wax knife, and you'll see that that's popped the rim out of the base. We lift it up, and there we have our base out of the model. So now we're marking where we actually have to section through either side of the die, and we're going to very carefully now section through. To do this, I place the pins back into the model base and just put something through underneath, some instrument, to elevate it slightly, and then take our sectioning saw and very carefully place it away from the margin and against the abutment tooth. And now we're just going to take that backwards and forwards lightly and put a small cut into that area. Now we could cut this all the way through, nice and vertically if you wish. You can see how I'm avoiding the margin area. We must not touch the margin when we're doing this. So we just put a section in there. You could again, saw that all the way through if you wished, but we're going to go across to the diamond saw, and we're going to complete the cut, cutting up from the bottom. But you can see that I've put in those cuts first so that when the diamond saw comes up, it doesn't fracture off the margin area, because that means we would have to start again with the pouring of our rim and with the pouring of the base. So very carefully with the diamond cutting disc, we're edging our way up towards that cut that we've put in, and when it gets close, the model will automatically just break, or if it doesn't and you feel close enough, you just press it together and it breaks away without affecting that margin, because you've previously put that little cut into that area. The diamond disc has a laser light that you can lay right along the cut so that it's very accurate, and you'll have a nice parallel cut so that you can extract this once you've got your model created. Now we're going to take a tungsten burr and we're going to remove the excess from around the die back so our margin is exposed and we can access the margin of the crown. We have to be careful not to touch the tooth structure, and particularly not to touch the margin. So I'm just going around and removing the bulk first and not getting too close. Many of you will have to use magnification for this process, like I do, once your eyesight's not as acute. And I usually finish off by using a scalpel to go around and reduce back to my margin, because I find that a lot safer than using a rotary burr. So we've just removed the excess. Then we're going to go around with a soft red lead in a pacer pencil, and we're going to mark our margin. This is important because we're going to seal over the top of that margin. We just lay our lead on its edge and it will pick up the margin. Now we're going to use model sealer. This is a hardening material which is going to make our die even harder. It will soak in, but it will seal in that little red line so that you can see the inferior border of the crown when you're manufacturing it. Just going to blow off any excess so we have a nice thin layer of that model hardener over the whole die. Then we're going to model harden both contact points on the abutment teeth so that we have a nice hard contact, because we will be using articulating paper to grind in the metal contacts once we've cast our crown, and we need that not to wear in this area. So now we're going to take our dye spacer. This is a paint that has a profile to it, a filler in it, and when painted on in 2 layers, it simulates the thickness of the cement that we're going to eventually use to place this crown. So we're going to create a space here for the cementation of the crown so that only the margin is seated and sealed, and the cement is able to fill this space beyond the margin. So we paint on 2 layers. The first layer will take about 3 minutes to dry, then on with our second layer, leaving it 1 millimetre short of the margin. If there's any that's a little bit closer, you can just carefully remove it with a scalpel, and there you have the dye spacer. We're going to allow that to harden now, and then our dye is ready for us to start the waxing process of the crown, and that will be in our next video.